Jason, thank you again for uh, joining us today and giving a presentation. For those of you who do not know Jason, Jason is uh, has worked with Bill, one of our partners. He's a quantitative ecologist at the Vermont Center of for Ecostudies. He's also a adjunct associate professor at the Rubenstein School of Natural Resources at the University of Vermont. His primary work is in avian and invertebrate ecology related to population and movement dynamics in montane spruce fern community. So, Jason, if you'd like to get started, thank you again.
Thank you. Spruce fir community.
For
Um, yep, ABs. Yeah, right on. Yeah, mostly I'm up on top of the mountains doing work, but this is a fun project. Just as a thank you, Nolan. Thank you for having me. It's good to see everybody again. Um, you feel free to interrupt me at any point. I'm not interested in hearing myself talk nonstop. And but just as a brief summary, that yeah, I connected with Ditch and Bill because I started this project as a result of people coming to us here in the Upper Valley of Vermont, New Hampshire, and asking me as an ecologist, I guess, what's with all of the tick spraying going around? Is there evidence that those tick sprays are effective? And if they are effective, what unintentional consequences do they have for the rest of the invertebrate community? I'm an ecologist and primarily works with insect populations and birds, not with the ticks. So, my interest in this project has been primarily for assessing potential negative impacts, if any, on the non-tick invertebrate community, and less so am I interested in testing the effectiveness of the tick control measures themselves, although I recognize that's an important part of all this project. So just as a little background here in the Upper Valley of Vermont, New Hampshire, there are probably 20 companies, I think, that spray. I noticed signs for there's probably more than 20 companies, and in this study, which has taken place this summer, 2024, and the last summer, I think there's 13 companies involved that sprayed properties in this study. So, and more than, I think it's like 15 chemicals in total, which is a mix of traditional permethrin blends and things like dialox and bifenthrin, and then on the other side, essential oils like winterberry oil, thyme oil, cedar oil, things like that are sprayed by these companies. So it's a real mix. And the goal of the project to begin with was to assess whether the differences in traditional poisons versus essential oil-based poisons and their potentially negative impacts on the non-tick invertebrate community. So we recruited landowners to enroll in the study. And I think in total, we had almost 500 landowners around here asked to be a part of that, way more than we could accommodate with our budget and our crew capacity. And we recruited people through our blog posts, interview on Vermont Public Radio twice, and the local radio station, things like that. So people came to us. I'll just focus mostly on the 2024 summary of our results this summer. Please interrupt or ask questions anytime. I enjoy that back and forth. So in the summer of 2023, we sampled properties, a mix of control properties where no spraying occurs and treatment properties. Our goal is to, say, show up on a Monday for a control property, show back up on a Wednesday. We survey randomly half of the property on a Monday and half on the following visit on, say, the Wednesday. We do a combination of traditional tick sampling for dragging within 3 sections of the yard. That's the interior of the lawn, where people like myself tend to think it's pretty low risk for ticks, but the companies themselves spray the entire lawn, so that's why we sample the entire lawn. The companies in our area don't venture out into the forest. They just walk the mowed lawn. So our sampling occurred just in the mowed lawn, either the interior, which is greater than 3 meters from the lawn edge, or right up against the edge, but not touching, typically like 1.5 meters away from the edge of the mowed lawn. And then we did flag along the periphery of the mowed lawn and whatever interface was out there, typically shrubs and woody vegetation, since we're here in Vermont, New Hampshire. So internal lawn, the edge of the lawn, and then the 1 meter walking along the edge of the lawn. Then we also sample in the non-tick invertebrates through beet sheeting, which is a rapid assessment of the invertebrate community there. Has some drawbacks for other approaches that I use, but the advantage of it is that it's rapid. It's a quick assessment of the diversity there, and we just rapidly count invertebrate orders on the sheet. So you walk up to a shrub every 2.5 meters along the periphery of the lawn, put out a square meter beet sheet underneath a piece of vegetation, a woody branch, and whack the branch 10 times, and then insects and other vertebrates like snails and slugs fall onto the sheet, and then we rapidly count them and then visually identify them to order. The two people that work for me work for us full time. They're as insect technicians, so they're and myself are pretty able to rapidly assess insects, but recognizing there's some sampling variability, I'm sure there, no doubt. So in 2020, and sorry, so on control plots, we try to visit, say a Monday and then a Wednesday, sampling half the lawn each time. We do that because the beet sheeting probably does induce some mortality on the insect population itself. It's small, it's a very small percentage. And we also collect the ticks. So we wouldn't want to collect the ticks on Monday, then go back on the Wednesday and resurvey for ticks. We would probably always find a decline in ticks, including on the control properties where no spraying has occurred. So that's why we sample the yard in two sections. It's like, you can think of it as split plot design. That introduces some variability of itself, of course, because the two halves of the property are not perfectly symmetrical or identical in vegetation composition or sun exposure. No doubt that introduces variability. I think that's a good thing.
Jason, can I ask a question?
Yep.
I wondered if, is it possible to measure herbivory as a sort of a longitudinal measure of what's going on with other insects? I don't know much about herbivory or whether it shows up in vegetation generally, or is that not something that's measurable outside of a crop?
Insect-induced herbivory?
Yeah.
Yeah. My grad student actually has a project where they're sampling leaves. Sampling leaves, taking a photograph and training a machine learning process to identify holes in the leaf and estimate the proportion of the area that is assumed to be due to herbivory. That is definitely something that could be done. Are you thinking
it would be useful because you go to a plot and there's no insects there. It could be that there weren't any insects there for one reason or another, independent of treatments. But if you had some measure of herbivory, you'd know, well, this has never really had a lot of insects, this site.
Oh, I like that idea. Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Often, that's a great thought. I hadn't thought of that. Mainly, we're trying to, so especially on the treatment properties, it's very much the case. I guess we could sample vegetation, take it back to the lab and do it. That's what we'd want to do. Very often on the treatment properties, the companies themselves give the property owners very short notice. So we are often showing up, some cases, just minutes before the spraying companies show up for our first initial visit. And our objective is to get out of there as fast as possible. So I guess that hadn't occurred to me to sample in the field and assess herbivory, but that's a great idea. And that is in line with my idea, my interest overall in assessing the invertebrate assemblages, diversity and richness of these communities on these properties as well. So I'll think about that for the future. Thank you for that idea. So on the treatment properties, people sign up for a service to be sprayed, say, every 21 days, but of course that never happens. And our objective is to sample the pre-spraying sample on treatment properties as close to the spraying event as possible. Often we estimate what those, say when a property is going to be sprayed, we try to communicate with the landowner and say, okay, we'll plan to be there Tuesday because they're supposed to spray Thursday. but then the company ends up coming Monday unannounced and spraying. Super common experience, a tremendous, much more than a lot of my other projects. This is logistically very challenging in coordinating with landowners and the companies that poorly communicate, with the landowners. So, but our objective was to say, show up a day of the spraying and survey before they spray or the day before. And then 24 hours after the spraying event has occurred, we try to return. Again, challenges with landowner communication and people not responding to us, not confirming that the company's actually sprayed, or due to inclement weather, often we can't visit 24 hours afterwards. But in general, we surveyed about 2 days on treatment properties. Our first survey occurred an average of like 1.8 days before the spraying event, and then 2.1 days after the spraying event. So it's not perfect. And of course, weekends come into that as well. I don't make my crews work on the weekends. So if they spray on a Friday, we don't get out there till Monday to sample. So that's important to consider, because insects that could be killed by the insecticide, of course, you could have recolonization from unsprayed areas that are adjacent to the area coming in and diluting that effect of the pesticide. And I totally acknowledge that. This is certainly a less direct method than, say, putting out a sheet and capturing dead insects that are killed by the pesticide that fall onto the sheet or something. So in 2023, due to a bunch of reasons, we surveyed mostly in mid-June through August. So we had far fewer ticks last year in our sampling of yards. We made some improvements to our sampling and housing provided for our technicians. So we're able to start in April of this year. And we moved up the mean sampling event by more than a month. So most of our sampling, I think the mean sampling date was something like June 8th or something like that in 2024. And it was a month later in 2023. And I think that just looking at the results, I think that comes into play here. So yeah, again, this summer we surveyed between late April and early August. Another advantage of moving up the sampling was to occur in the peak activity periods for ticks in our region, and the tick captures that tick captures in our data set reflect that. They peak around, I think, early June in our area, in our sampling set at least, and then drop off. It's important to note that these companies spray from March in our area. They spray from basically March, early April through November. They spray regardless of the risk of tick activity to humans, which is why we also sample outside the peak activity period for deer ticks and black-legged, for deer ticks and American dog ticks. So, early August, we find very, very few ticks, but people are still paying hundreds of dollars to have their lawns sprayed during that time. And again, we sample the lawn, not the surrounding wood matrix, because that's where the companies spray. And we assume that the insects in the lawn come in the most direct contact with the pesticide, instead of having to make assumptions about how far the pesticide drifts into the forests, for example. So in 2024, we surveyed 68 control properties and 67 treatment properties. And yeah, about 2 days before and after. I think I mentioned some of the chemicals, right? Things like garlic oil, Wondercide, winterberry oil, thyme oil, Acentria IC3, permethrin and different blends, Acentria, Dilox. It's a whole assortment of chemicals. I haven't looked at the results yet broken down by the chemical that's applied at treatment sites yet, but that's certainly an interest in this overall research, just to assess whether essential oils are different in their non-target impacts than traditional poisons are. So I think we captured. So we walked about 31 miles of transects on those 150 properties or so that we surveyed in 10-meter sections. That's 31 miles, something like that. So we walk a 10-meter section every Monday of the week. The technicians practice with a tape measure walking for 30 seconds over a 10-meter period. These are lawns again, so they're mowed lawns. It's really easy to get extremely precise, and most of my technicians end up being about 0.15 meters accuracy over a 10-meter section. So really good. And we measure that every Monday of each week. So 31 miles of transects, and we captured 250 ticks this season. I think it was, I have to look back at my data. I think 75% of those are black-legged ticks. And our properties tend to be either or. Either we only have, black-legged ticks or American dog ticks. And our properties tend to have one or the other, but not both. And yeah, 75% black-legged ticks. So what can I say? Similar to last year, tick density dropped by about 70% from the first visit on treatment plots to the second visit. That's approximately what it was last year or so. That varies property to property, of course, and I'm sure that varies with chemical composition that's applied to those properties, but I haven't looked at that specifically yet. I have my mind in other projects that I'm tasked with right now. But yeah, about a 70% drop in tick density on treatment plots following spraying, no change in tick density on control plots, which is what you would expect. We are interested in the relationship between invasive shrubs and tick density. So last year, we just simply noted whether there was honeysuckle, either barberry species in our area, any one of the invasive buckthorn species, or burning bush. We just noted whether that was present along the edge of the lawn. And when we dragged that or flagged that 10-meter section, we simply noted, yeah, burning bush is present. Last year, there was no relationship in an occupancy with ticks and the presence of any of those invasive shrubs. This year, we counted the individual number of shrubs of each of those 4 invasive groups. And I think we counted like maybe 2,000 invasive shrubs along the edges of people's lawns. And again, we didn't find any relationship between the abundance of ticks that we captured in our flagging and dragging and the abundance of those 4 invasive plants along the edge of the lawn. But admittedly, those are like 2,000 shrubs out of 31 miles is something like 1 shrub per every 25 meters. So I think, for there to be a relationship between the abundance of burning bush, for example, and tick density in the yards that we sampled, it would have to be a very strong relationship to come through our data set. So, but in a lawn setting, we can say 2 things. One, those invasive shrub groups are just very uncommon, and we don't see a relationship between the occupancy of ticks or the abundance of ticks. So, and the presence of those 4 invasive species groups. We have 2 barberry species in this area. We just lump them as one in our analysis. So for the invertebrates, we sampled more than 17,000 invertebrates by beat sheeting those 3,600 or so individual shrubs and trees along the edge of the lawn. We start at one edge we divide the property in half. We start at one edge of the lawn matrix, and we just sample whatever happens to be there. We move 2.5 meters down, sample the next thing. And we sample woody vegetation that is 0.5 meter and above off the ground, because watching the company spray, the technicians basically walk around and spray. Some of the companies use surfactants, which stick to the vegetation. And I can see that most of that chemical, to me, appears to fall within 0.5 meter off the ground when they're spraying the edge of the forest, and about 2 meters. So that's the window that we also sampled invertebrate communities from on woody vegetation. Again, just 1 meter off the lawn. And I'm really interested in probably this group is less interested in that, but for me, I'm very much interested in the invertebrate community that's present on those different species of shrubs that we did beat sheeting on. So we identified every species, all the 3,600 shrubs and trees that we beat sheet sampled from to genus. And it's a pretty simplistic communities in people's backyards, as you can imagine. And we intentionally made an effort to beat sheet on those invasive shrubs as well. So we would sample non-invasive shrubs as a group, and then make a special effort to also seek out burning bush, buckthorn, and barberry, and invasive honeysuckle species to sample as well. I was pretty surprised. So plants that had, I'll just very briefly touch on the invertebrate community and individual plants, but I'll just say that some plant groups in general had very little invertebrate activity on them, including sumac species, which you might expect because they have really reduced leaves, except at the very top of the plant where the flowers are located also. Species like buckthorn and honeysuckle, very low invertebrate richness, group richness, I should say, and pretty simplistic communities compared to other plants that we sampled. Things like oak, hemlock, willow, and elderberry had 2 or 3 times the richness of invertebrate groups present on those shrubs. Also, burning bush, for whatever reason, was covered in invertebrates and was one of our highest, one of the groups of plants that had the highest average number of invertebrates sampled per beat sheeting effort, which really surprised me. I was really not expecting any of those non-native invasive shrub groups to be good habitat for any of the insects, but burning bush was, at least in hope, you know, who knows what they're doing on those plants. I can't say that they're breeding there or they're engaged in active herbivory, but they were present there when we sampled. So I thought that was interesting. In 2024, in general, control properties had about 30% more invertebrates than treatment properties. And I think that's pretty similar to 2023 as well, off the top of my head. Invertebrate communities really seem to be pretty much the same on the first visit to the second visit. A lot of sampling variability, which is what you'd expect, because again, we sample different half of the lawn each time we visit. But that also makes sense. We don't expect to see much change in the control properties. And overall, control properties have about 20% greater invertebrate richness compared to treatment properties. What was really interesting, though, I think, is last year we saw overall like a 20% drop in invertebrates on treatment properties after they sprayed. So comparing the post-spray visit to the pre-spray visit in 2023, we saw about a 20% drop in invertebrates, non-tick invertebrates. Some groups clearly impacted more than others. Groups like beetles remain the same, no change in pre to post assessment. And then other groups like caterpillars last year dropped by 40% when they sprayed. In our return visit, we found 40% fewer caterpillars on average. So substantial variation in individual groups. And I would imagine how those invertebrate groups, you know, where on the plant themselves they actually hang out and what they're doing there probably changes their exposure to some of these chemicals. Imagine an insect group that hangs out on the underside of a leaf and doesn't receive a lot of direct contact with the pesticide versus something that's on the dorsal surface of the leaf that is more likely to be directly sprayed. And then differences in soft and hard exoskeletons, you might theorize about why some groups are more susceptible than others. So this year, though, in 2024, just quickly looking at the data, I don't see much of a change in the invertebrate community on the treatment plots from the first pre-visit to the post-spray visit. So that is something very different than 2023. And I don't know what to make of that yet, except that we did sample a lot earlier in the season. And I can say, so earlier in the season, there are more ticks out, but there are fewer insects out flying about. So in our insect captures, beat sheeting efforts reflect that. We just simply count fewer beetles and ants and sawfly larvae in April and May than we do in July and August. There are just far fewer things out and about. So that's very possible. I'm definitely interested in other people's thoughts if they have some. That's definitely possible as to some of the explanation for that. In our data, we do see that as the season progresses, as we go from April into August, the change in the number of insects that we capture on a treatment property from the first visit to the second visit, that difference increases throughout the summer. So, so I think that's part of it, but I haven't dived into results enough to know what else might be driving those differences. But again, so last year, about a 20-some% drop in insect communities, invertebrate communities. I say invertebrates again because there are some non-insects in there like snails and slugs, and spiders, of course. And then this year, off the top of my head, it doesn't look like there's really a big drop on treatment properties. So I'm anxious to dive deeply into that and to see what might be accounting for that. I think that's it I have to say about the 2024 season in terms of sheer numbers and things like that. I'm sure that was exciting as heck, to have someone vomit numbers at you. But I'm happy to engage in conversation or have any thoughts. I just saw those disease the pathogen testing results. I haven't looked at those at all yet. So,
question from your experience, what's the bounce back time for some of the invertebrates after like a treatment?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I get asked that a lot by homeowners. You know, okay, maybe I'm wiping out some portion of the insect community when I spray. How quickly does it recover? Is it just a couple days? My first assessment would be, well, it's recovering from probably immigration from adjoining areas. So if it does recover, you know, you're essentially taxing your neighbors. Can I borrow some of your invertebrates to spread across my lawn after I've wiped them out? I suspect it's a rapid recovery in terms of sheer numbers because of immigration of insects into that yard. If these were closed systems and all of the insects came from insects breeding on that property, then I imagine the recovery time would be, much longer, weeks, months, potentially. But because these are properties with neighbors nearby, then we didn't, I should also point out, we tried to make sure that none of our control properties had adjacent, like touching a border adjacent treatment properties. Or there were two treatment properties side by side. We didn't have any. Some of the neighbors of control properties wouldn't communicate with us and tell us if they sprayed or not, so we don't know that perfectly for every control property. So I can't answer the question directly, Noel, although it's a really great question. If it'd be a very different research question to a longitudinal study to go back repeatedly through time and look at the invertebrate communities on an individual property and assess how a single spraying event influences the trajectory of that invertebrate community. Does it reduce it in overall abundance for the entire season, for days, weeks? I can't answer that, unfortunately, because we only go to those properties 2 visits that are typically separated by about 4 days.
I guess along the lines of that, do you ever re-enroll participants like year after year, or is it all new people?
We re-enrolled people only if we were unable to survey their property in 2023. They were included in the we really tried to visit those 2023 signups that we were unable to get to last year, just to kind of say thank you for sticking with us. I mean, logistically, it was such a challenge to work with homeowners who often are at work, receive a text message, the company's coming in 10 minutes, or the company came an hour ago, unannounced to them. So we did roll in people, but from the 2 years, no property is represented in 2 years. Yeah.
Would you ever consider re-enrolling, or is it not?
I mean, I have lots of ideas about different research questions looking at the long-term impacts of spraying. And yes, if the nature of the project changed to that, then I'd definitely be interested in that. I have thought about how to, now that I have this army of 500 homeowners who are interested in this project, I've definitely been thinking about ways to incorporate community science principles into these efforts. You know, visiting 150 properties twice took 3 of us just working frantically to fit that in, racing from place to place. Visiting those same properties 3, 4, 5 times throughout the summer would exponentially increase the commitment to our time and probably our costs from the logistics associated costs of driving. So I am interested in thinking about ways that landowners themselves could perform an assessment of the invertebrate community. And we have some simple ways that another entomologist here on staff and I have been thinking about. We don't want it to be a heavy lift for landowners. We also don't want it to be something easily recognizable. One of the technicians for one of the companies told me that they all know about our study. Some of the companies have directly reached out to us. We interact with the crews frequently because we often are there surveying when the spraying companies show up, and they very graciously just wait for us to finish sampling, typically, and then they do their spraying. But I definitely think if we had, say, like a drop cloth out, I wouldn't do this, but let's say we had a drop cloth out underneath the sheet, and the explicit purpose was to collect dead insects that maybe, succumb to near instantaneous mortality from coming in contact with the pesticide. I'm pretty sure the spraying companies would learn to avoid those sheets pretty rapidly. So I need to think about, can we incorporate community science principles and have these landowners throughout the summer associated with multiple spraying events, collect information on the invertebrate community, but in a way that doesn't influence the behavior of the spraying companies themselves. So that I'm struggling to come up with a good idea.
We've thought about that a little too, Jason.
Yeah.
We sampled about 170, 60 properties in Cape Cod this past summer. So I appreciate the effort that goes into it, but we're thinking about, there's still, for every one of them, there's a household that would have liked to have been part of the study that we couldn't get to. So we're starting to think about ways that we could just use our training videos and show folks how to do it. And it may not yield the kind of quantitative data that would be useful for study, but it does get them engaged, and it could lead to like qualitative discoveries, like Lone Star ticks are going to show up, in Vermont eventually, and to surveil at that level might be an advantage.
Are you thinking of having people directly sample for ticks or for in their
Yeah, we were thinking ticks. I was thinking like give them a design of a flag, maybe even provision them, a certain number of households with flags and have them flag their back property, which may actually help to kind of reduce the numbers locally as much as anything else.
That's a great idea, and I definitely can share that. I'm sure the same as your property owners, that the people in our study really wanted to know. I think their understanding of tick biology, behavior, movement is a little simplistic in general, but they wanted to know where are the exact tick dangerous areas on their property, and so sampling themselves would be a direct way to assess that. Yeah,
nothing's more real than when they get the data themselves, when they get the observation themselves. I did have one question. Do you have a sense from your enrollment process of how many companies there are that are delivering all these things? Is it dozens, hundreds? Is it the same company? Or
in our Upper Valley area here, which is 40 miles north and south and 15 miles east and west, 20 miles. I suspect there are probably about 20 companies. I think we have 13 companies that sprayed properties included in our study, plus do-it-yourselfers.
Mm-hmm.
Do-it-yourselfers were kind of really nice because we would walk the property with them and they would tell us exactly where they do or do not spray. And we could, I should also say, we always walked the property or had the property owner mark up an aerial photo of where the crews sprayed on their property, and we tried to restrain our sampling to sprayed areas of the property, acknowledging at the same time that it was very common for property owners, when I asked, where do the companies spray, they would say something like, it depends who's spraying. The guy with the beard never walks up the hill. I don't think he's in that great shape. And the young guy likes to spend time around the hot tub. I don't know. So even the same company from visit to visit, they don't have aerial photos. The companies just jump out of the truck, they're running a gun in it. So I'm sure there's variability in what part of the property is actually sprayed each time. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's incredibly thorough work, Jason. Well done. 31 miles of transects. Do you have any thoughts about what proportion of the properties were synthetic pesticides and what were natural botanical blends?
In our study, it was we purposefully tried to recruit people that used synthetic pesticides on their property. And we had maybe it's the culture here, the community of people, I don't know. Here locally, it seems like the essential oil-based companies have cornered the market. And that's reflected in our sample as well. Second time I was interviewed on public radio, I specifically asked people, I specifically said, I really want to connect with landowners who use chemicals like this, traditional pesticides. And I got a few more people to sign up on our Google form, but I'm going to guess, there could be some correlation, I'm sure, between listenership rates for public radio and willingness to pay more to have essential. I'm sure there's some relationship there. And I'm unfortunately recognizing the reality of the demographics of who our organization reaches with our outreach efforts. I'm sure we're probably overlapping quite a bit.
Well, I mean, even just in terms of being really cogent about tick safety and motivated to take any action, there's a socioeconomic gradient for sure. So, okay, wonderful.
It's probably, the answer to your question is probably like 85% essential oils in our study.
Mm-hmm.
So in the end, some of these traditional poisons that were used, I'm sure I just won't have very much statistical power to say much about those specific chemicals, because that is something that property owners ask a lot. They say, hey, I use chippers, chemicals, but I hear the Orkin stuff really kills them. Can you tell me?
Did you have any challenges getting detailed chemical information from the companies, or was it?
Yes. Yeah, I don't want to say that some of the companies straight up stonewall me and just would not share information. They wouldn't respond to me at all. Other companies asked me out for lunch, which I declined, and wanted to, I want to say wine and dine me. That sounds like I'm a lot more important than I think I am. But some of the companies just straight up refused to give me information. So I gained access to what chemicals they're using through the property owners. I asked the property owners to ask them. And for some of those companies, it took 3 or 4 times them asking the companies to they'll say, oh, it's just a blend of stuff in the email. And I said, well, could you ask for more information? And it would take 3 or 4 efforts before they would supply a product sheet or the trademark name of some chemical. Yeah. I think I kind of became well known among the tick spraying companies in the area, which maybe hampered things. I don't know. I know that some of the people in our study would directly complain to the companies and mention me, say, hey, you showed up on Monday and I'm in this study with Jason Hill, and you can't do that. I need to know exactly when you're coming so Jason can sample and see how much stuff you're killing. And I'm sure some of that kind of fell onto me, like the company's blaming me for this disruption in their life, because I'm sure it's logistically incredibly challenging for the companies just without me to coordinate their crews and who gets sprayed when and where with the weather and all that. And then you add me in there, and I'm sure they really don't like me. So that could be some of the reason why some of the companies refused to provide information about what they sprayed, because they suspected that the homeowner was a participant in our study. That's possible.
Was it like that with all, because like the 2 companies that we worked with on the Cape were very cooperative and like wanted to actually see the science and see what the results came from and if they had to adjust their methods.
What the company that is the largest proportion of our sampling is called Pure Solutions here. And I met with the owner of the company. They're a franchisee, but this person owns the New Hampshire and Vermont portions of the company. They are very much of the belief that their products are good and that they prevent insects from being killed because the owner told me, they basically believe that spraying essential oils are safer for everything except ticks, I guess. And that if they weren't around, that people would be spraying more traditional poisons and doing more damage to the invertebrate community. So they think they're very much pro-environment by offering these services. And so they were very willing and happy to share information with me, very forthcoming. And I'd say also that the crew members themselves, most of the people out there spraying are college students making $18 an hour. They didn't have an investment, a fight, aside. When they would show up and we would be sampling, they would be happy to take a smoke break and sit in the trucks and watch us drag this white cloth across the lawn, which I thought was pretty silly when they would talk to us. They didn't care. So I think that any resistance from the companies was a higher up level, which I can understand. They could perceive that as a threat to their business model, obviously, if we came out and said that these chemicals kill everything.
Plans for next season, Jason, or is that still under debate?
At this point, we have, more than 200 properties, roughly 50% controlled treatment in the study from 2 years. And I think that's going to be it. From a time managed perspective, I want to devote my resources next summer to back to some long-term insect monitoring things that I'm involved in. So I think that's probably it. Unless I come up with a way, as we were talking about there, to involve landowners in a community science perspective that isn't heavily taxing people. I'm really, I manage a large scale community science project called Mountain Birdwatch, and I'm very weary of that and respectful that we don't pay people to collect these data for us. And so if I'm really interested in that route. I just need to make sure that it is a minimal investment of their time while at the same time returning very high quality data. And I'm interested in the invertebrates as well as the ticks, so I just have to think about that. But I'd love to continue that moving forward.
And
I'm
thinking about if there's any way we can use this citizen or community group to try and get a handle on the interannual variability at all of these sites. Because I mean, in terms of tick sampling, that is one of the main challenges, is that the variability is just off the charts. So if there was a really low impact way to have community members do, 1 or 2 standardized drags during the season and just report the total ticks they captured. Not even speciation, just, even I guess identifying ticks can be a challenge, but then at least you would have some handle on, do it on 4th of July at 11 a.m. or something. I don't know. And it might be too hard to get anything really usable, but
I think there's
a really incredible community base built up.
I think there's people really seem to be engaged and want to be more involved in understanding the risk to themselves and their pets. So I think there's opportunity there. I just need to come up with some creative ideas.
Does Vermont have local health boards, like municipal, town by town?
No, not that I'm aware of.
But and do they have county level health agents or?
Gosh, I don't know that. I'm sorry, Steve, I don't know that either.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's county based, but not 100%.
Sometimes those people can be motivated to, gin up some support for sampling efforts. Here in Massachusetts, each of the 351 towns has a health agent, and they're variable in their response, but some of them are very interested in ticks and tick-borne diseases.
Yeah, I guess also that's a great idea. I'm taking notes on all these suggestions, and our sampling was confined to the Connecticut River Valley, where the Upper Valley is located, and would love to sample other parts. I know Bill has very different tick communities on the western part of Vermont, other side of the Green Mountains. So it'd be great to incorporate more geographic variation in our data set. Logistically, we're just limited. Yeah.
The person to maybe have a conversation with, and we could set that up if you wanted, is Patty Casey. So vector surveillance in Vermont is a mixture of public health and Department of Agriculture, and Patty's from the agriculture side, and she might have some ideas on how to resource the sampling effort.
Yeah, I know Patty, and just went to her concert the other night.
Oh, she's amazing.
Yeah, she's great. I'll have to follow up with her about some of those ideas. Yep.
Cool.
In all of your sampling, do you sample the same property year after year, right?
Well, we're only in year 2. We did 20 in the first year, and we visited some of those properties to repeat. But yeah, I think Tom is taking a very different approach. He's trying to do different homes each year. We were not concentrating more, but we were thinking as much about the community that's built out of that sampling effort and keeping the long-term relationships with the yards or the homeowners that we're sampling. And that recovery, go ahead.
Well, because as I say, because you need to, right? You need to keep them in the loop for 3 years, or
yeah. What do you guys do in terms of what message do you push back to individual homeowners? Do they get assessments of their property or a summary statement, or
for every property would receive an immediate, so any property with a homeowner at home, we would show them any ticks which is kind of an eye-opening experience for some people. But we show them any ticks that we captured, and then they would receive an email, or some people, we asked people how they preferred to be communicated with when they signed up. Some people it was text. So I would text them, say, hey Bob, we just finished the survey and we found nothing, but I found this cool spider species, and it's the first time I've seen it in Vermont or whatever. So I try to everyone the day of got information about that we surveyed and whether or not we found any ticks, which species and age groups they were. And I tried to include one cool invertebrate that we found, non-tick invertebrate that we found on the property, to get them also thinking about the invertebrate community. Yeah, and some people requested aerial photos with demarcations of where ticks were located. It's taking that kind of stuff for granted. I was, a lot of homeowners just really, when I say struggle to interpret aerial photos of their own property. I would show them a map and say, we're right here in your house. This is your barn here. And they'd be like, oh, really? That's not something I guess they look at every day. So that we stopped doing that. We didn't get much positive feedback for those maps that we provided people, but yeah, so they saw the ticks, got a report that day, what species and age groups we found, and then I tried to mention one cool invertebrate. We made it a point not to comment on people's properties at all. And as a middle-aged guy, I was also very hyper aware of that, and I would always work with my back to people's houses when I was sampling. So I would walk in a way so neighbors or other people couldn't misperceive my actions as but if there were safety features, then we would also point that out to homeowners. Occasionally I would point out poison ivy growing on swing sets, things like that, to homeowners. Other than that, nothing else. Unless the property owner engaged with us, then we would engage. So.
That's great. So fortuitous that we ran into you doing this in the parallel universe with us. It's great.
Yeah, makes me realize, I'm just obviously not connected well in the on the tick side of things. That's not been my focus. And again, my interest in coming into this was more on the non-tick invertebrate side of things. So this has been a rapid learning thing for me, and I thank you for the inclusion and for helping offer some thoughts and guidance on this project. So.
Jason, to go back to more like a more hands-off approach, have you ever used molasses traps?
For mothing, for
For
attracting,
like, well, because we've used molasses trap. When was this? I want to say like 6 years ago, in Plymouth County in Massachusetts. There's like a human triple E case, so they were gonna aerial spray that area, and then they set some molasses traps to see uh, insect population before and after like aerial spraying to see what the difference were. Um, it was kind of like a hands-off approach because you kind of just set it and forget it, go back and just collect and then sort the insect. Uh,
yeah.
right.
I do something similar in non-lethal setting for the moth traps that I run every night at my house with fermented beer, with stale beer and molasses actually, which works really well for moths, especially that aren't attracted to black light. But one of the goals of our assessment, or one of the goals of our choosing a method for insects, was one that would minimize our time. We have two technicians downstairs right now who are pinning insects downstairs from pitfall traps, and they do nothing but that. And it is so ridiculously labor intensive and person power intensive that I'm really weary of engaging in any kind of lethal sampling. It's an easier sell for the homeowner as well, to say, hey, we're just taking a look and letting go. That's 99% true. Occasionally I whack one directly with the stick, but so my colleague Kent McFarland here is involved in a project called Moth AI, which is a portable blacklight powered box that folds up out of his chest and has a machine learning process that rapidly tracks any object that moves more than so many pixels per millisecond, and takes a photo of it and tracks individuals while they're on this white sheet and also identifies them. And is doing very well. There are about 3 other groups that are involved in this Moth AI stuff right now independently. So that's kind of where I'm thinking down the road, actually, is machine learning based process for assessment of living insects. But yeah, so that's gonna not, I mean, we can't just sample moths. But I'd love to get to that point. I could put out a machine at someone's property and would count insects for them and identify them. And didn't require thousands of person hours sorting through dead things here in the lab. We already do plenty of that.
All right, great. So if that's it, I want to thank you again for joining us and presenting.
Thank you, Alec. Thank you, everybody.